You're listening to the She Lift Project podcast, a show dedicated to helping women achieve higher levels of success in the workplace. No matter where you are in your career, we want to help you grow. Now here's your host, Cynthia Kirkpatrick, a CPA, CFP, and Senior Financial Advisor at Moneta Group.
Welcome to another episode of the She Lift Project podcast. I'm Cynthia Kirkpatrick. Thanks for joining us today. And I'm really excited about the conversation and where it's going to go. We have Laura Sawyier on with us, and she is the founder, CEO of LKS Styling and Consulting, which really, for those of us listening, it's about style, presence, confidence. It's your brand. It's how you carry yourself. And so we could all use a little bit more of that. So thanks for joining.
Certainly. I'm happy to be here. I could use it too. So, it applies to everybody.
Says the one in a beautiful suit and these amazing silver Adidas, like shiny sneakers. I'm jealous. I want a pair. Apparently they're sold out. So
we'll find you some. We'll get on the radar. Silver, anything metallic right now. This is our first tip of the conversation. Okay. Metallics are having a moment this spring. So just know that.
And it doesn't matter. Silver, gold, anything, just metallic.
Rose gold, titanium. Any sort of like darker metals, anything that's like a gunmetal, anything metallic you can wear, and you can mix it too, which is like the surprising double tip on top of just wearing metallics for this season, but you can mix them together. So we're going to talk more about style, but right out of the gates, we're going into the tips.
Well, and that's good to know, because somebody who grew up in the 80s, 90s, there were all these rules you had to follow, and you did not break these rules. And I love that we're allowed to get more creative and fun and probably lean into being more of ourselves than having to follow whatever prescribed rule has been out there.
That's right. It's a breath of fresh air. And at the same time, we have less rules, which actually make it more complicated for people. And it's why I am very grateful to do what I do every day, because there is lots of opportunity to help people navigate that for themselves.
So true. Somebody who likes rules and puzzles and the numbers have to work. I get overwhelmed and anxious when there are too many options and too many places we could go. So I'm sure maybe that's a great segue into what you do and how you do help people, because that's got to be a piece of it.
It's a huge part of it. And I'll just touch on that briefly, and then I'll share a bit in terms of what I do, because we went in hot here with the styling advice. But at the end of the day, I'm just helping people solve problems for themselves and helping remove the pain points. And one of those pain points for a lot of people is overwhelm, decision fatigue, right? So you walk into your closet from a styling perspective, and most people, the percentage always shifts time to time for people, but they say we wear 20% of our wardrobes, but that's 80% of physical real estate that is taking up space in your home, in your closets, in your drawers, and it's distracting you, and it's causing a lot of cloudiness in your mind as well when it comes to getting dressed. So that segues well into what it is that I do for a living. So, on one hand, I work one-on-one with individuals in their closets. Literally, I dress people for a living, which always gets a laugh out of people when I say that to them, because they're like, what? And so I work with women. I also work with men. I have clients across the board who have professional lives, who don't have professional jobs outside of the home. And I go into people's closets literally, whether it's in person or virtually, because I work with people in St. Louis, but I work with people nationally as well. I have a book of business in the New York tri-state area, in the Denver Boulder area, San Francisco, all over. And so I go into people's closets and help them decide what works and doesn't work for their body, their budget, and their lifestyle. And so we clean out the noise, we get rid of things, we call it a closet edit, and then we start to build from there. And on the styling side of my work, I have a virtual platform. So every single client that I work with, their closet gets fully digitized. Do you know the movie Clueless?
Yes.
Okay. So like for any of those who are listening who know about Cher's Closet and Clueless, it's sort of an iteration of that. That's usually what I hear from people when I show them what it is that this closet app looks like on their phone. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's the Clueless closet. But I say, but I'm the AI. I'm the one that's building out the foundational pieces in your closet, that's styling them together, that's helping you decide what's new and what to shop for in your closet. And so it's, as it's explained, it's photos of all the items in the closet. It's inventoried. So for people who like to know what they own. You get your eyes on it, because to your point about either feeling overwhelmed, there's that risk when it comes to getting dressed, but then there's also the idea of forgetting what we have in our closets because we have so much going on otherwise. And so this just helps create a lot of visibility into that. And then I style pieces for people to wear every single day. So like in your virtual closet, Cynthia, I would say, here's the pinstripe dress, here's the pink bow shoe, and here's the pink blazer, and here's the jewelry that goes with it. And it aligns it all up together so that when you wake up in the morning, you could say, I really want to wear my pink shoes today. What are the 10 ways that Laura styled it for me? And you can go into this virtual platform and you can see all those ways. So now it's creating a lot of effectiveness when you wake up in the morning. You could have kids, animals, parents you're taking care of. You're trying to get out the door and you look to something like this and say, okay, now I know what I need to do to get dressed today and I can get on with my day, which takes a lot of stress away for a lot of people. I'm trying not to sell myself in our first 10 minutes here. So just to create a picture for that. But I do a lot of dressing for every day, special events, travel, headshots, things like that for people's everyday lives. The second half of the work that I do is speaking and coaching around the applied psychology of style. So I'm currently getting my master's in psychology. I gave a TED Talk on this last year on the power of style. And so this is where I really begin to combine the research and the really anecdotal part of the things that people need to show up every day. Now, clothing is one aspect of that. But when I think about style really embodies who you are. It's your aesthetic representation of who you are and how you show up every day. So it's your clothing, how you adorn your body and carry yourself. It's your beauty, it's your grooming habits, those sort of things. And then you layer in, to your point, which I'm sure we'll get to as we talk more, the presence element of it. So how you are speaking, what your tone of voice is, what your body positioning is, what your body language is, and ways that you're just engaging with other people and your environments around you.
Wow. There's so many things we have to talk about, and you just dropped the whole Harvard psychology in there that you're working on and adding. I think from where you started with the electronic virtual closet, and you mentioned the pink shoes, like who would think about, okay, I really need to pay attention to my shoes today and what do I want to wear around that? But for a woman who's working, and I may have a meeting across town, a block or two where I may be walking, sometimes I literally am thinking, what are the shoes I need to wear today for my day? Yes. And that would be amazing, as you mentioned, get rid of the decision fatigue, because we're, especially in a world with social media, we have so much coming at us nonstop that to take that one major point away, I'm sure is such a relief.
It's a huge relief for a lot of people. And you mentioned something really important, which is the practicality of it as well. And so I hear this from men just as much as I do from women. Women just happen to have a lot more options in the clothing and accessories department than, say, men do. But particularly coming out of COVID, the challenge, the struggle that I hear most often is, I don't know what the rules are anymore, and they're changing so quickly again. On top of that, the way that I get dressed in the morning is often very different than how I need to be dressed maybe in the evening or later in the day. And so our lives are becoming a lot more dynamic and our needs are a lot more dynamic. And so how can we then think practically, how do we show up for those moments every day? And then on top of that, not only practically, I want to feel good, I want to look good, I want things to fit. I also want to fit for myself with my personality and my preferences, but within the context of the situation. That's a lot of variables. And so that's where some of the overwhelm can also come into play. And it's just like, how can I help people strip down some of those elements and get really clear on what it is that your style is, what, your branding is another way to put it, and just help people show up effectively and to feel like you fit. Because nobody wants to feel like they're left out or, they had the fashion faux pas or they didn't show up dressed appropriately, because that just sucks your attention and focus out of the moment. And that can be really problematic for people, not just whether, I have a client who I've shared this story on my TED Talk, but she called me initially, this was a few years ago, and was like, I'm calling because I've gotten to a point where I was at my daughter's graduation and I was in a rush. I have a lot of kids. I just needed to get ready. I didn't want to buy a new dress. I thought I would pull something from my closet. And she's like, it didn't fit quite right. None of them did. And I had to go with it because it was later that day. And she showed up and she sat at the graduation and she was completely consumed by feeling like her dress was tight. People were looking at her. That snowballed into her thought process of, these are her words, where she was like, are people judging me because I didn't put enough effort into how I showed up for my daughter in this moment? Or am I a bad mom because I didn't take the time to make sure I needed to do what I needed to get ready for this moment for myself? And so that turns into things like shame, right? It turns into maybe sometimes perpetual moments where people are like, I just don't want to show up to other things in my life right now because I had a bad experience. That's a big deal. And this is a tool that we can use to either help us or it can hinder us in those moments. The same I would say also goes for, someone who's got a big meeting, at work in the afternoon and, they didn't sleep so great. They're stressed out. They're thinking about their presentation. They wake up in the morning, he's got to get the kids out the door, puts on, the cleanest pair of pants that are closest to him that he can throw on that work with the top that he's tucking in. They maybe feel a little bit snug. He sits down, he eats lunch. They maybe feel a little bit more snug. And now all you can think about in your meeting is, I'm so uncomfortable. My pants are really tight. My focus is stripped away from where it needs to be. Am I actually showing up for this moment? And people can write those things off as much as they want, but subconsciously that kind of stuff can really affect us in the moment and also subsequently long term too.
Yeah, I wonder if you hear this a lot. People probably think, oh, being super focused on what you're wearing, what you look like, that can sound so vain. However, I love how you went into it's all of those emotions underneath. And as we prepare for our oldest to graduate from high school, I'm literally sitting here thinking about it because we've got mom prom coming up, graduation, and I'm like, I'll take care of everybody else first, and I'll just pull something out of the closet. Okay, tonight when I go home, I'm going to look right away. But as you mentioned, it could take you away from having a better moment, life experience with that important person or event in your life that you're probably not going to get a redo on.
No, you're not going to get a redo on. And I would add to your point that I'm going to pull out of that, which is it is not vain to a certain degree think about how you're showing up every day. And one could argue, well, Laura, that's the line of work you're in, so this is just confirmation bias. And I don't deny a little bit of that. But I have done the research. I continue to be in the research, that goes beyond just style, but like how we have, self-perception, how we're showing up every day. And there is data that points to a value emphasis on why this matters. Not to mention, we have always lived in a visual world. I talk about it this way and I sort of catch myself and I'm kind of thinking of how I'm reframing this these days and going forward. But we live in an increasingly visual society, but we have always lived in a visual society. It's just amplified even more now and through new mediums, right? Because of social media. And also, we just can see each other more because of it. And we're out and about again because we actually need to be out and about again. We'll get to connection. We'll come back to that one. This is a part of it, but I want to hone in on this aspect of just visual engagement. And so when we are presenting ourselves, I got dressed today. I'm going to use myself as a guinea pig right now. I got dressed today because I knew I was going to be sitting here with you. We did not plan wearing pink suits or pink jackets together. This was just a great coincidence. But I thought, I'm going to be on camera. It's going to be full body. I'm going to wear some cool sneakers. We can talk about them. I'm going to wear a pink suit. It looks good on camera. So these are just like the steps that people go through. Now, not everybody's going to be on camera. I understand that. But these are the kind of things that we want to go through in our mind. What's the checklist of how do I need to present myself today? What do I need to look like in order to achieve the things that I need to go out and achieve? And so we can use our visual communication to provide cues to people, right? Like we're both in jackets. This is a podcast, you have a lot of different women who've been on, but it's generally, women who are professional women, I imagine too. And so I have to think about showing up in certain rooms where I'm like, I can't wear some far-fetched outfit and expect that, I'm going to have like a fringe dress on or feathered top and expect for people to feel comfortable to connect with me. I already have to battle the fact that when I say to someone, oh, I'm a stylist, usually people go, oh, don't look at me, my hair's not so great today, or I didn't iron this, or this doesn't fit quite right, I had to get out the door. And I'm like, if anything, you're talking to the most empathetic person who's going to inquire about that, not judge it. And so that's just one example of why visual communication matters. Now, we will go to the digital side of that, of course, because we have platforms, of course, like LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. The list goes on and on and on. And we as social creatures are looking for social proof. We want social validation of others, particularly in business, just anytime we're engaging with people. But I will say, I'm going to use the LinkedIn example because I think that platform is starting to sort of re-amplify itself again in the business, in the professional communities. And there's a lot of buzz going on with people now where it's like, personal branding, professional branding, presence is really important. Again, confirmation bias. I'm thrilled that people are talking about it. But it really matters because we are drawing first impressions within seconds from people. And if you can utilize how you're visually communicating to your advantage, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a bad thing. It's not actually an icky thing because not only is it signaling to other people, we now know because of research, it's also signaling back to ourselves and how we feel about ourselves. And it can help us move through those moments with a little bit more confidence. We can use it as a tool. It's not the only tool. This is not what you wear is going to change how you feel overnight. It doesn't work that way because it's both on the surface and it's beneath the surface as well. But it's something that can sort of help you move into that space. Last point on this that I'll make is I have clients or I have people that have come and have worked with me and who, before they started working with me, said, well, my friends work with you. I'd love to call you, but, I want to lose 10 or 15 pounds before I pick up the phone and make the investment. And I say, I'm always here whenever you're ready. Like I am a so no pressure kind of person to work with because just think about it. If I came up to people and said, you should call me to work with you, they would probably feel insulted that I said that to them.
True. Very true with what you do.
Right?
Yes.
Like, I don't want to make anybody feel that way. It's really important. Like again, to these points about how you're communicating and connecting with people, it's really important that I'm making sure people feel comfortable. But what I will say to them is, why are you waiting? Why? I'll ask them that. And they usually are like, well, I don't want to make the investment. I don't want to spend the money. Like, I don't want to go all in, because my body could change. And I say, well, we don't have to go all in. Let's just start to slowly dip our toe into this, because I will tell you, when you begin to dip your toe, and this goes with anything, it's micro steps. You have to start somewhere, right? We often prevent ourselves from doing something that could affect change because we're afraid of it, or we think, no, we need it to happen immediately. But this is like anything. You have to dip your toe into it. And I see it when it happens. And it's the most magical thing is when people start to make even just little investments. Oh, maybe I'll add a few new pairs of shoes, or maybe I'll add a few tops here. And they're like, wait a minute, I'm starting to feel a little bit different. Like their shoulders go back, their body language changes, and then they're more inclined to then go and to do more of that. And that will then influence all the other goals that they have. Again, I'm not trying to paint some magic picture that it just changes everything, but it does take these small steps to begin to affect the big change. And we have to make the investment in ourselves in order to do it. It doesn't just happen.
We were talking about that before we started recording, about how just things in life, even this podcast, right? We can't do episode 50 if we don't start with episode 1. And if we were to wait to figure out to make it perfect, well, we would never get to episode 50.
No.
So whether it's, your closet, your presence, your brand, or business in general, or anything, it's what the James Clear, 1% better every day, that atomic habit
Yes.
sort of thing,
Yes.
which,
whom I love.
Yes.
As a recovering perfectionist, I can tell you, and honestly, as an entrepreneur overall, I do what I do every day, which I shared and we'll get into again more of, and I have the privilege and frankly, the gift to be able to share that gift with people. I'm also an entrepreneur. And there are hold up moments too. So like I get into the weeds with other things in my life as well. We're all susceptible to it. And the best you can do is just like try to help yourself grow and evolve and look to people on your team. And, you know, whether you're reading books or, you know, looking into research and resources that are helping you, or you're calling people to be a member of your team. It's similar in your line of work as well, Cynthia. Like we show up to be members of people's teams and we're here to support and to move through life with you. And there are moments where we need to tap in a little bit more, tap out, but we're here to help people just like move through those motions a little bit easier.
Yeah, I like that you're an extension of people's teams. And as you mentioned, I think we're recording now the day before April 15th. So tax season is heavy on my mind right now. And
thank you for having me then.
Had a call this morning with a tax preparer thinking about a client, all that fun stuff. But yet, you know, come May, June, we're not probably talking with them as much. So the team ebbs and flows, comes in and out as you need it. Thinking about just somebody, you gave a couple of examples, but what is it like, or is there a story that stands out when somebody either was hesitant or first came to you, and the things you were able to do and the transformation maybe you saw?
I mean, there's a lot of stories actually, so I'm trying to keep this conversation going as I'm going down the list of them. I'm going to back into this and say you get that sort of finite proof of those moments after the fact when I get the messages from executives who are in their corporate tower in New York City and they're in the bathroom stall, and not the stall, but they're in the bathroom and they're taking a mirror selfie of themselves, and they're in the C-suite of a publicly traded company and they're sending me photos of their outfit saying, I wore this for meetings today and this is something that I never would have put on prior to now and working with you. And I feel incredible. I feel like myself. At the same time, I feel like an elevated version of myself. That's extraordinary. There are the stories where they are women who, you know, I can think of someone who doesn't have a professional job outside of the home and has a daughter and is trying to model for her daughter, you know, the challenges that we in particular women have throughout our entire lives in terms of just like our relationship with our bodies and also how we show up in our world. And, you know, someone who has struggled with the fact that, you know, she wasn't in the professional world, no longer is, and is trying to figure out what her identity is, and to also lead a good example for her daughter who has figured out, you know, she doesn't need to dress the way she thought she needed to dress because it's how all her other peers were dressing, and that she finally figured out what her sort of recipe was for herself. And she stopped caring as much about what other people thought about her and more about what she thought about herself. And to be able to walk out the door every day, even if it was for carpool or to go to meetings at school, and to say, like, I wasn't putting myself in the corner of the room feeling uncomfortable. I walked in the room feeling really good about myself and was able to have conversations with people more naturally before. So those are really transformational stories that I think really stick. I think, you know, shared the story about the mom with the daughter, you know, in the middle school graduation. This is someone I've worked with now for a few years who has told me verbatim, like, you have changed how I see myself. You have helped me get there. That's extraordinary. That is not something to be taken lightly. You know, I'll try not to get too deep in the emotion of that, but it's a big part of why I decided to go back to school and to study psychology, because you know, there are a lot of people out in the world who help people do things and help people grow in their lives. But I'm a big believer that you should have credentials, especially when it comes to people's mental well-being and how they're perceiving themselves and also how they're representing themselves. Like, you have required things that you need to have accomplished in your work to be able to do the work that you do. And so I feel really strongly about that. So it's been a service to me to be able to grow and understand human behavior. It's fascinating. I'm a people person as well. I actually love people, and I love like learning from people and hearing people's stories. And to be able to feel the sense of responsibility that I have in these kinds of conversations and to help people shape who they are is really humbling And also really mission critical that like I have the tools to be able to help people steer their way through all of that, because I just want to make sure I'm doing right by all my clients, which at the end of the day is just, like I've said, it's one of the greatest gifts. It's like a gift to the giver kind of moment. So I could go on. There are many examples. I'm sure they'll pop up as you know, we keep talking.
Well, and we're going to I think where we'll take this is we're going to go back and figure out how you got to where you got. Like, what did little Laura think or want to be when she wanted to grow up? And then I believe through it all, we're going to get back to the science and the data that you mentioned that you use in your TED Talks and the psychology degree. So
great.
How did we flash back. Is this what you knew you would always be doing? I can't imagine, right?
No, it's really interesting. So this is an important part of the story. So I grew up in a divorced household. I was split living between two parents. And I have two older brothers and spent a lot of time exposed to sports, actually. And I was a competitive downhill skier growing up. It was my solace. It helped me get away from the drama of just growing up in a household like that, with parents who worked really hard and actually instilled a lot of my hard work and persistence and perseverance in my work, as did skiing competitively. I was always a creative kid, though. I will say it was another outlet for me. I think if I go back, it really started with probably when I was in, 5th grade, 6th grade. I was probably playing with Barbies later than one should be playing with Barbies. And I had a Barbie dream house. I can picture it as I tell this story, where I'm in the basement of my mom's house. And that, like I said, both my parents worked a lot. So I spent a lot of time home alone as a kid, probably more than I should have. But as a result of that, did a lot of individual play too, outside of sports. And so I would take nail polish and I painted the walls of my Barbie dream house with nail polish, which like Barbie probably doesn't love to hear. I actually have like a glue gun scar on the inside of my arm because I was like late at night with my nightlight on in my bedroom, was cutting up fabric from my mom's fabric bin and making clothes for my Barbie dolls. So I definitely had that creativity in me. I will tell you, and the reason why I mentioned growing up in a fractured household was I had a few sort of critical moments growing up where I was kicked out of one parent's house and then the same thing in college. And so there was a lot of, I just need to like survive and get on with this and do what I need to do to study, to get school done fast, to get a job. I'd always worked. I started working when I was 15. Actually, probably before that. I think I sort of like, off the books, did my brother's newspaper route at West Point when we were living there as kids. And so, it was definitely like, I shifted into this period, especially with college. I went to school and studied media and digital culture at a time when that was really beginning to be a part of our lives. This was when Facebook, was becoming Facebook. And so I was like reading books on like early days of Instagram and like how to do marketing on Instagram, and ended up working and graduating college a semester early. And so always wanted to continue to do things creatively. But like I said, it was really about, I just need to survive. I need to get a job. I'm really grateful I had friends' parents who were really supportive of me in those years. And eventually I actually went to work for a family who I was babysitting for. This is a good story. I showed up at their house and the husband and wife were getting ready to go out. I was, had just graduated college and was working part-time at a wellness startup and babysitting on the weekends. And I sit down in the living room with the boys and we've got the TV on and I look on the coffee table and there's a magazine, Flower magazine, and there's the guy who's just left the house. The husband of the couple is on the cover of this magazine. And I was like, where am I? What is this guy in this magazine with flowers all around him? Come to find out, he ran an event design firm based in New York City, and I was living in New York at the time. And I, started babysitting for them more and more. And I said, hey, by the way, I looked at your website. Do you guys need any help with updating your website? These are the kinds of things that I can help you with. And he was like, great, let's do a project over the summer. And I did a good job apparently because they offered me a job to run production at their company in New York City. And that was a chance for me then to like move into the city, to like live the New York City dream, you know, as a young person out of college. And I started working there, and I tell you this because I learned so much about working in the creative field. It's all about attention to detail. You've got to be able to communicate and articulate a lot of creativity to people who maybe aren't visual or are visual learners, and they need that, but you need to be able to keep the guardrails up and to keep people focused on what the project is. Layered on top of that, we were doing live events. And so you have to understand, like, what is the visual storytelling? What are the elements that go into it? And then how are people going to feel? A lot of that translates to styling. You know, I worked in retail here and there in college. I worked with clients in that kind of work who were in the fashion industry. We did fashion shows and really specialty dinners and things like that. But I ended up here in St. Louis because I met my now husband, who grew up in New York City, who came here to go to WashU 20 plus years ago, is a serial entrepreneur, and was like, surprise, I live in St. Louis. And I was like, what? So I moved to St. Louis 11 years ago. And at that point I was working, you know, as I shared at this company, and I came here and it was just a different kind of landscape. And so I, you know, worked in a lot of different places. I actually did some work in marketing and thought leadership at a wealth management firm, actually. And it's where I met my mentor, who to this day still is one of my two mentors. I feel very, very blessed to have two mentors who are, of course, friends first. But she has written a few books. She did a lot of TV appearances at the time when she was pretty active, keynotes, very obviously, as we know, very public facing. And she and I were having coffee one morning because up until that point, I had then spent a year, I was recruited away to help launch an event design startup here in St. Louis. Loved it. I was burnt out. This was burnout before burnout was a buzzword, and had no skin in the game, admittedly, in the business. And she was like, let's regroup here. Let's check in and let's figure out what you want to be doing. And I was like, I'm so unhappy doing this work. It is soul crushing. And she was like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to help one person feel really good about themselves at one point throughout their day. And if I can do that, then I've checked my box off. I've served my purpose. And she was like, have you ever thought about going into styling? And I was like, all the time. And she was like, well, I think you've got a great eye. You clearly have some transferable skills. Let's just try it out. And so I said to her, okay, I'm going to do the research. And, you know, I'm going to be honest here. She was like, bill me like you're in New York. And I was like, no problem. Talk about having the kind of support from women around you who was like, you can do this. Do your research. Let's figure it out. And let's find what your value and what your worth is in this space. And so we did it. And I want to pause on that moment and just say, you know, I've had and continue to have many people in my life who have been hugely transformative to my success and to my thinking and how I am evaluating and thinking and considering, who do I want to be in this world? What do I want to achieve? What is my path forward? And I had a voice in my head for a really long time. As a young person, I shared, obviously, I gave some context for this. And this is really the moment why I shared that context. Because growing up in a fractured home, being a creative kid who was also an athlete and who excelled in that, I didn't understand that those things could actually be complementary to one another. I thought that I was way all over the place and none of it made sense to me. Not to mention, I also didn't believe that I had the pedigree to work in fashion. So when people ask me today, oh my gosh, like, is this what you've always done? Is this what you've always known, where you've wanted to be? I think I can honestly say in my heart, deep in my heart, I think I knew I would always get to this point. I didn't know how I'd get there, but here I am. And I broke free from that voice saying, you don't belong in those rooms. You're not supposed to be there. You don't have, you know, the experience or the background of the family that's going to tell you can be in this space. And I had a lot of resentment for that for a while. And I was really insecure about it too. But that's exactly what taught me what I know now, how I'm equipped to be able to help people on top of my studies, on top of the research, on top of doing this for 8 years now. Those are the things, that's the foundation as to why I'm able to do what I do today with so much compassion. It's because I understand. I've been there, and I still have those moments too. So here we are 8 years later, but she was my first client. And since then, it's just been an incredible ride of helping people, but also being an entrepreneur.
And it sounds like continuing to remind yourself of who you are, what your passions are, and that you do belong in all of the spaces that you're showing up in.
Yeah. And I'm like anybody too. You know, I say to people, I'm like, I'm a human as well. Just because I'm a stylist and I'm always presenting a certain way, you know, it's really important actually that, you know, one of my style words is approachability, and people are like, I wouldn't have made that a style word. And I'm like, it's because style is more than just style. Being approachable is really important. And I've learned that I have to show up with so much compassion. And I've shared this before, like when I work with people, whether it's in their closets one-on-one, whether I'm doing coaching or consulting, you know, with a team of executives, or I'm in front of an audience of 10 or 800 people, I need to be able to show up as a compassionate truth teller. And that's how we get the good stuff done. Because if I'm way too up here for people, they're not going to relate to it. But I have to have a certain level of polish. That just comes with having the experience, like anything in life.
As you were speaking earlier, I was thinking there is, as I get older, there is a benefit to getting older, and you can't fast forward experience in life.
Right.
Do I wish I was 20 something knowing what I know today? Absolutely. Have I gone through some hard times, and am I still healing and repairing from that? Absolutely. Right. And I'm sure at some point I'll say, thank you for that, you know, thank you for that learning lesson.
Right.
It certainly sounds like that's all part of your journey and your process.
It is. And, you know, I appreciate that. And I think the first thing is, to your point about, like, you know, sort of wrapping your head around aging, just time, right? The movement of time. We won't get into the aging components, especially as a woman. Okay. But like the time aspect of it, it actually, I've become more reflective of the slow down, actually. Just be in it, be present in it more. You know, because I want to run. I want to get there. I'm a speed person. I was a downhill skier, right? Like I want to get there as fast as possible, but I'm like, just slow down. You're there because you're just skating along with it. You're doing it. And to the point about feeling like, you know, grateful for having the hardships, grateful for being able to put the resilience into action. You know, I have definitely had these reminders in these seasons of life where, you know, growing up, there were plenty of hardships. That would be a whole other podcast episode. But like what those hardships taught me, I finally got to a healthy point of like, it's not resentment anymore. I'm actually so grateful it all happened to me, because I wouldn't be the woman I am here today. And the more time passes by, the more I realize, no, I actually need to put my resilience muscle to work more. Like I don't actually want to be too far away from it. I actually want the moments to come, because it's just going to teach me more, and it's going to make me better and better. And I think that's a hard space to want to be in. And I say that with the caveat of, I'm not saying that I'm a perfectionist at that either, because when I'm in it, you know, as we're taping this right now, I broke my foot recently, and that certainly has its own, you know, issues as well, because I can't move as well as I was a few weeks ago, and that will change. It will go back to normal, but you have to rebuild. You've got to do the reps. You've got to build the muscle, right? And I think, you know, I use the sort of like sports metaphors. I can't help myself, but that's one of them with anything in life. You just like, when those moments happen, you're like, you can be truly devastated by them, and that's perfectly reasonable and real, and that's life. But we have to remind ourselves that like we will come out of it, and we actually will come out of it stronger. Like cliches are cliches because they're true.
Yeah, it's like feel the feels, and then how are you going to work through that? Which sort of still lingering in my mind with some things you were saying earlier. And I think so many people have these fears and these doubts, as you mentioned. I don't have the pedigree for this. I don't know this. I don't have that. I'm only this or that. Again, so many people feel that in whatever form of life that they're going through. How does one get through it? Is it only time? Is it having a mentor who can, straighten your crown and say, like, what can people do to work through that and beyond?
Sleep. Go for walks. Be uncomfortable in the uncomfortable. I think that's a big part of it. It's case by case scenario, right? But I think the biggest things are, yes, having good health, putting your health first and prioritizing that. So that's sleeping, moving, hydrating, fueling yourself. I was just talking with a friend recently, and admittedly, I was like, I'm not currently running, but I run and I move. I used to do it to be skinny. I still want to be fit and healthy. But like, I used to do it to be skinny, and now I do it because I want to live longer. And shifting that framework is a big part of it. I still get caught up in the moments of wanting to be skinny and to feel good and to look good, because that's just a reality. And I will add, like anything, there's a double-edged sword in my line of work. There is a pressure, at times to really show up and to look really good, but not perfect. And that's the thing that I have to remind myself, which leads me to the next point, which is gratitude, again, is not to be overlooked. It's a really powerful tool. And I used to think that, reflection of gratitude, especially in the hard moments, was, and still is, don't get me wrong, it's, I'm grateful that I have heat in my house. I'm grateful that my cat snuggled me. Those are great things to be grateful for. What I'm learning now is I'm turning my gratitude reflection also into the actions that I have taken that I am grateful for. I am grateful that I sent the hard email that needed to be sent. I am grateful that I showed up at the thing that maybe I didn't really want to show up to, because maybe there was a little tension in the room for whatever reasons there may be, but I showed up anyway with dignity and with grace. I'm grateful that I got done what I needed to get done to make sure that the fridge was stocked today, so that my husband and I would be happy and we wouldn't be wondering where, I won't say eggs, where the coffee was, so do you know what I mean? I think I'm putting gratitude into the actionable items that I am doing, because the action is where you get out of it. I probably can't curse on this podcast.
I think we might have had
I'll say
one.
You've got to to get out of the what, you've got to walk through that stuff. You can't go around it, and you can't sit back, because then you're not going to go through it. So you really need to make sure that you get up and you just take the next step. And part of taking the next step is, and I know I'm talking in metaphors and hypotheticals here, but part of taking that next step is sitting and digging into why am I feeling this way? And that's something that I can allude to, which is when I'm maybe feeling really stressed or overwhelmed. That's a moment of sort of stress, right? How do you persist through overwhelm? For me, the only way through overwhelm, outside of these other areas that we just talked about, is sitting and saying, okay, where's the problem? What is it? Why are you feeling this way? What is the pain in your stomach tied to? Okay, maybe it's, I have deadlines coming up and I bit off more than I can chew. I'm a highly persistent person. Admittedly, I have moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, maybe I should have said no to that other thing, but here we are. And so I think, okay, sometimes we've got to reshuffle the schedule. Is that going to help make you feel better? And all of a sudden, my stomach feels a little less tense and tightened. Okay, great. What's the first thing that we need to get done? What's deadline number 1? Okay, write down the things that you need to do step by step in order to do it. Or it could be an emotional thing that maybe I thought I upset somebody, or maybe something was delivered incorrectly and it was miscommunicated. It's the same kind of step process that I go through. And this is a self-soothing tool that works really well, where you're like, okay, what is this emotional feeling tied to right now? Okay, there we are. What can I do to back out of that? How can I mitigate the situation? Okay, what's the next thing that I need to do? And those are, I think, really helpful tools. I feel like I got a little sort of in the amoebas talking about it that way. But those are some areas that I use as tools to help me work through the challenges. And yes, talking to my mentors, talking to my friends, my trusted advisors, are people who can help put it into perspective and then put it to rest and then come back to it.
I think a lot of what you said there is important, and probably within the last year, I don't know why, I've got 2 points that you made that I want to come back to. I notice that sometimes I will procrastinate on things that either I'm not 100% sure how to get started or how to get it done.
Right.
Or I'm afraid of what I have to do or the outcome. So I wait and I wait, which then it just sits inside longer and longer.
Right.
And it doesn't get better. So I'm really trying to work on that thing that I'm avoiding right now, because I'm not like, just, you gotta get in there and start, and then you feel so much better by getting it done on a Monday morning versus procrastinating and you're 30 minutes to the deadline and now you're really
Yes, and I'm guilty of that too, right? It's like we think of that, whatever that, deliverable is, if you will, and it's this big mountain. And usually the root of procrastination, and there's research that points to this, is because we don't feel confident in that we know or we have all the answers to then go get it done. And so we create an even bigger mountain out of this. We know this, right? And that's what then perpetually creates that domino effect of why we put it off. And action is the only way to solve that. That's the only way out of it, is you have to take the one step. And I always laugh. It's like 9 times out of 10, the procrastination on the thing that once I get to it, I'm like, well, that took about 70% less effort than I created in my mind. And that's then the burden that I put on myself. And we all do it to ourselves. Like, we're all there with it. I'm not going to say we're guilty of it, because like we should, it's just human nature. And on top of it, I think we beat ourselves up in those moments too, because now we've created a bigger mountain, and then we've convinced ourselves temporarily that we aren't smart enough to get the thing done, which then makes an even bigger mountain out of it, which is not true, right? Because that's where we get all held up in it, is like, we don't believe that we have all the resources to achieve what we need to do to deliver on it. And this, I think, goes back to like, the cliche of like, it's the journey, not the destination, right? And it's like, apply that to like tackling the tasks that you need to get done, which is like, it's not going to be perfect, but you need to get it done, and you're going to learn something from it.
And sometimes 80% is as good as you need to go.
Well, sometimes 80% is other people's 100%.
Right.
And that's okay too. And also, I can tie this back into the work that I do a bit too, because I have to strike the balance, especially when I'm working with clients. It's the same actually when it goes to speaking. You can't give too much of it. Otherwise I can overwhelm people's systems too. So I have to be managing and regulating not just myself, but how the expectations of others. So my clients are calling me because they're saying, we know you're going to come to us with solutions, and not too many of them. You're going to come to us with the right solutions. And as a stylist in particular, it's really dynamic and interesting because, some days, like, I have to be an artist. I'm working with somebody's preferences, their mood, their body type, and their lifestyle, and their budget. And I need to come to them and say, not only am I trying to help you get what you need in all those categories, I also am trying to push you outside of your comfort zone a little bit. So you've got to be able to like work that in a way that in any moment it could set something off. And that in one way is an articulation of how someone may think, I'm going to procrastinate on this because the risk of me not achieving the goal or the risk of me failing is really scary. So like, I'm in practice on that kind of stuff all the time, because I'm like, I need to make sure that I'm reading each individual person in that line of my work, and I'm meeting them in that moment with the right answers. And sometimes we don't have the answer, and that's okay too. But like, I have to have enough self-awareness and self-respect to know that I'm an expert, to accept that when someone says no, that's actually a closer step that we are to the yes ultimately. But you've also got to be able to make people feel comfortable in saying no to you, which is a really, really interesting just dynamic with an individual when you're working in this kind of work, because people don't want to hurt people's feelings.
Yeah, that would probably be difficult in what you do, in that if you push them too far outside the comfort zone and they don't want it, but they don't want to tell you no.
Right.
It's
I've got to be able to read that.
Yeah.
I've got to be able to read people's minds, hence why the psychology of the work that I do is so critical. It's so important, and it just gets me going.
This is a great point to take us there, because I thought we need to get there soon. I mean, you can, maybe some people would sit back and be like, oh, this is all great, but this is fluffy and this is whatever. But there's a lot of data and research that you've done, and now the psychology to so much of this, of how it plays in. I mean, how and why go there?
Well, it's really important to me because you said the right word, the fluff of it. I probably should talk about this more. So I feel like this is like the first time I'm actually saying this publicly. But when I went into the work originally as a stylist, I even grappled with, it's so much more than that though. Like, and does this define me? And I was self-critical of it, admittedly. I, of course, am not anymore, which is why it's easy in hindsight to say this now. But I learned early on in the conversations that I was having with not just clients in their closets, which, by the way, is one of the most vulnerable spaces in our homes. I go into people's homes, they're changing their clothes in a room where they're looking in the mirror, they're trying things on. People are self-critical in this moment, or they're self-celebratory, or they're just neutral and they're trying to get to where they need to be. But every single one of us has to get dressed every day. And we have thoughts that go into that moment when it's happening, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that are rooted in our childhoods, that are rooted in experiences and things that are going on in the present in our lives. And the dialogue that was coming out of those moments with clients, and also just with friends as a woman, admittedly, but also with men, it's really important to emphasize that, because this is for everybody. The light bulb started going off in my head very quickly. And I was like, it's so much more than what's on the surface. On the surface is the tool, and it's the creative expression. And that is on a spectrum for everybody. It's different for every single person, but it's so much more as well. And so I started doing some digging, and I learned that there was a young field. This was, of course, 8 years ago, a young field called the applied psychology of fashion. And I have taken that further, and I have expanded it to be more encompassing of the word style, because on one hand, fashion can be really intimidating to a lot of people. So can style, but the word fashion is really frightening to people.
I think about the catwalks and the people who are 7 feet tall.
Yes.
They're not even human, their bodies. And then oftentimes the clothes that they're wearing, and like, there's no way a normal person walking around a street would wear something like that. So yeah, fashion has this almost alien, intimidating feel to it.
Yes, I think there's the visual element you just described. There's the cost element. There's the body aspect of it. I'll say to people, like, people will often associate fashion with exactly what you just said, and luxury logos, exclusivity. This isn't for me. I can't afford it. I am a regular person who wants to get dressed every day and feel great. I'm not a fashion person. And so I weaved in actually my narrative that I had about, I don't have the pedigree for this. And I started connecting those dots and was like, everybody at the end of the day wants to feel good about themselves. Someone who doesn't want to feel good, call me, send me an email. And if that's you, then change my mind. But I believe that every single person wants to feel good about themselves. It's just a matter of figuring out all the layered elements. And I don't just mean the clothing layers, all the layered elements of who you are and what your being is that you have to work through in your life, and what maybe some of those challenges are, or just the reality of your day-to-day life and navigating that. But like, we all just want to feel really good. And so that then, came back to my North Star, which was, I want to help people feel good. And in order to do that, I'm connecting these dots in these conversations I'm having with people about money, body, how they're showing up visually, how they're, imparting any sort of influence, or they're struggling with that, how they're not feeling like themselves and they're maybe feeling left out of the group or the room, and helping people navigate that. It really comes down to the psychology of it. And so it's why I decided to go back to school. And here we are. So I'm in the thick of it. So I'm about halfway through my program at Harvard. And I decided to jump very quickly into being able to understand the research, to synthesize the research, and then to be able to articulate that to people in different kinds of settings. And it's a really interesting coupling of both the data and also the very applied aspects of helping people get dressed every day. It makes it so much more approachable. And it does take the fluff away from it, because when you combine those two things together, it's really, really powerful.
And the program at Harvard that you're doing, what exactly is it? What does it entail? Because that sounds so elite and high level.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because to my point again about wanting to be approachable, elite and fashion, like those are scary things to people. I'm really proud of it, I will say, because, again, as a kid who shared what I shared before with growing up, having to graduate college early, having to go take care of myself, this is an extraordinary accomplishment for me that I'm really proud of. I did not grow up thinking that I would ever, get an advanced degree, not just from Harvard, but in such an excellent academic setting and program. So I feel very grateful every single day for that opportunity. It also reminds me that I belong in these kinds of rooms. And that's something that all of us, I think, need to remind ourselves, that you may not think that you can get to that level or that point or that space or that room, but in order to get there, you have to try, and you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, and you have to take risks. And so I worked very hard to get into the program, and it is a true master's in psychology. It's an ALM in psychology. That is what my diploma will say. Now, why I picked that program is interesting, because there is a school, the London College of Arts, that is the only school in the world that has an accredited applied psychology of fashion master's and undergraduate program. It does not exist in the United States. And so with this program at Harvard, I've had the opportunity to do it as a self-directed focus. So that's what's so exciting for me, because you can't do that at any university where you're getting a master's in psychology. You can't just say, hey, I'm here to study the psychology of style, actually. That's more on the PhD level. This program allows me to really cultivate my focus in my core classes and the research, as well as what my thesis will be, which will be in the applied psychology of style, which is really what my TED Talk was meant to be, the sort of, the jumper cable to. So some of the classes, to be specific, that I've taken, things like self and identity. I'm actually, studying women's brain health right now, which is really critical, because we're seeing a lot of research now from just this all of neuroscience and neuropsychology as well. There's a lot of great data coming out as it relates to women and menopause, of course, and Alzheimer's too. But there are elements of this research that matters and apply to the work that I do every day too. It's connecting those dots. So it's very exciting for me. I'm like a kid in a candy store every single day, not just in the work that I do, but also in the research that I'm doing. This summer, I'm going to be studying, I should probably know the name of the class, but basically we're going to be studying aesthetics. And so like all visual aesthetics. So like, how do our environments affect us? How do what we wear on our bodies, how does that affect us? How does the interpretation of fashion impact us? So all of these things are critical to the work that I do, applied again with one-on-one clients. When I'm doing consulting, again, if I'm doing like leadership development consulting in organizations, all of that research applies. And then the biggest area for me, which is where I'm focused long-term in my business, is just to continue on thought leadership. And so I do a lot of speaking. I've spoken at a lot of incredible large organizations, some SMBs as well, some associations, and just to continue to cultivate opportunities where I can share the research and also the stories around the applied psychology of style and confidence, presence, influence, professionalism. It's not just style. It's really exciting to see how this just really opened the door to these other areas that are all connected to one another.
And confidence typically comes from experience, building, knowledge in an area. And so I think whether it's fashion or those different things, when you're trying to do it yourself and build that versus having somebody come in and just like, this goes together, this goes together, this goes together, etc.
Right. Well, we'd love for other people to make decisions for us all day long, whether we want to admit it or not. But I think part of that, like anything as human beings, this goes back to this idea of overwhelm and decision fatigue. We have increasingly so much more going on in our lives. We are constantly, and have always looked this way, we want visual storytelling, but we want a framework in that storytelling. And that's where the data of it with the storytelling really is important to bring it together for people, and it drives it home. So like we have research that tells us, that what we put on our bodies can influence how we think of ourselves and how we then perform. This is a concept called enclothed cognition. And so there's a study that was conducted in 2012 by two psychologists that resulted, and then subsequent research that has since proven further on this point, that when we put something on, it's not just only the physical experience of wearing the item. So like the actual tactile experience, what is the material? How does it feel on our body? But it's also the meaning embedded in that, the symbolic meaning of the item. So I've spoken about this previously where like you could put, I think jewelry is the most symbolic item that we would adorn our bodies with. So I'll use that as the most obvious example. But, I'll say to people when I'm speaking, and not to be insensitive, but I'll say like, who in here wears a wedding ring? And it's one of the more common items that people wear on their bodies. Now, again, I understand not everybody is married or wears wedding rings, so it's not to exclude anybody, but, and I'll ask people, what does it mean to you? And they say, often like it represents, like the partnership that I have, the commitment that I've made, right? I've gotten stories from people where it's like, I have a necklace, that was my grandparents', or it was my grandmother's necklace. And when I wear this, I embody her values. I think of her, it's really important to me. I wear a Star of David, actually. I'm Jewish. Like that is a visual representation of my identity. So like there are things that we put on our bodies that help us not only articulate and express who we are to others, but they remind us of who we are too. That's a part of our value framework as well. And so those are layers of just thinking about this psychologically, which is like, who am I? What do I stand for? What do I value? Is that changing, right? And how am I building my character on top of it? And so we need the framework of all of that to help us navigate it. Because if it was a free-for-all, if you walk into a store and there's clothing everywhere and you're like, I don't even know where to start. You can apply that same analogy when it comes to, right? I hear it all the time.
That's me. I raised my hand for those who are listening and not watching.
That's right. But you can apply that same analogy in terms of like how you're showing up with presence, confidence, again, the buzzword that is happening, which I hope it's not a short-term buzzword, but like the personal brand really does matter because you need a framework for that. And so like, what are your values and what do you stand for? And then what are you willing to adapt and change with over time? Like I said, those seasons of life, it's going to change inevitably a little bit, but what is your through line? What is your North Star and all of that?
As you're mentioning all that, I think about, it comes back to who you are internally, who you are at the core, and being able to live that, breathe that, and all of the parts of your life.
Yes.
Obviously, when I come to work, I'm not going to wear what I'm wearing that I did yesterday when I was at home, not really running around, whatever, sweats, etc. A lot more comfortable, but still being my true self and aligning. And I think about even things that we've done at our house where, as we talked about, like any store I go into, I'm overwhelmed. Like this goes with this goes with this, and nope, not me. Mm-hmm. I just want to walk out and give up. I also know, though, when we've had people come in and help design a room or whatever, at the end of the day, we're just like, oh my gosh, we feel so good. We feel like this is us. Like they put it together in a way we never would have figured out on our own, mm-hmm. but it's us. Mm-hmm. And that story kind of stuck out to me with the personal brand, the clothing, the et cetera, that at the end of the day, we're all really striving to be ourselves. Mm-hmm. And how do we then do it in all facets of our life and get the help to be able to do that?
Right. There's a lot of great research too, to that point about the environment, where cognitively we're being influenced by our environments around us. And studies have really shown, particularly When you think of like young children going to daycare, right? Like you've seen over the last decade or so, daycares like revamping their environments, their physical environments to make sure that they're really supportive of like tactical development, social development, creative play, creative development. You can also apply it into workspaces, in particular now coming out of COVID too. And I mean like in office, but also in home offices too. And the research is really telling us that we are actually getting cognitive stimulation by what's around us. The same can then be applied for what we're putting on our bodies. So there is amazing, amazing data that gets me so excited to see that like people, we are human beings. We are again visual. We are getting stimulated by what we are surrounding ourselves with. And so I hope that we continue to move forward, you know, in a world that, you know, arguably is becoming more increasingly online. But at the same time, I do think that people are actually putting a lot more value on in-person connection because it's really critical. We are social creatures. We need that. But we also need to be in stimulating environments that allow us to feel enriched, that allow us to feel creative. We are all creative people. I love when people are like, I'm not creative. And I'm like, okay, we'll talk in like 10 hours a day. We'll talk in 2 years from now and we'll revisit that whenever you're ready. But like, you're a creative person. It's just that we don't always apply creativity to the things that we think are not creative. So what I'm trying to say is like the act of getting dressed is an act of creativity for every single person. It just may not be working the way you want it to, but it's an act of creativity for sure.
Well, that's important because I would sit here and say I'm not creative, especially when I compare myself to my husband. Oh, my Lord, like totally different. Although he has told me every now and then I'm creative, but I think I've had to adapt that way to keep on my toes around him.
Sure.
However, when I sit back and think about it, what I do for a living, the financial planning, the CPA, the puzzle making, there is creativity here to say, I know that client, I know how they work. Some of the things you said earlier, like I cannot recommend this to that client because of some of the psychology there, but to somebody else I could. So that creativeness,
yes.
I agree. What you said was we all have that creativeness in us somehow, some way, and we will use it in the areas that we're good at and we're passionate about.
That's right. Morgan Housel has a great book, The Psychology of Money. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, I think Minetta, during COVID or around that time, we actually had him come on and do a webinar thing for our clients and things. Yeah.
He's amazing. So he's like one of my superheroes because he is connecting the dots, right? And it's the same thing when I think about my kind of work. So like, we are so emotionally tied to money. We are so emotionally tied to our body and how we're showing up. Now, that could mean, it doesn't always mean we're emotionally tied to like, I want to show up and look great. Oftentimes people are emotionally tied to their body and they're like, I don't want to be seen in my body right now too. On top of that, I'll add The Psychology of Money because it's a big part of, I loved reading that book because it's a huge thing that I navigate in the work that I do every single day, whether it's from working with clients, but also even to audiences that I'm speaking to. Like, it has to be spoken about. We have to acknowledge it. It's a big part of how we show up, the financial aspect of it, and also the sort of visual being seen or being not seen is really complicated. It's really nuanced. And so that's another reason why I was like, I need to sink my teeth into the psychology of this kind of work because we're not monoliths. We're all different. We all have our own nuances. We all have our isms. And you have to your point, like creating the puzzle that you do, it's like working a puzzle. And that then is the greatest act of creativity. It's an even greater act of creativity, in my opinion, because we're doing it for the service of other people.
Yeah. That's what I love doing is the service of other people. And so to connect on that level, and we can do it in so many different ways. And we didn't even touch upon today about, you mentioned, being an entrepreneur, business owner. We didn't really talk about the challenges that come with that. How did you overcome? However, when we go into these conversations, I never know where it's going to lead and what I'm going to get out of it. Yet I always get so many, I don't know if anybody else gets anything, but I always get so
I got a lot
much
from you today. You're easy to talk to, Cynthia, which is just the best kind of conversation.
I just let everybody else share their wisdom and expertise and I try to soak in. Thinking about your time, anything that was pivotal or you would change or, I hate to say, like, a mistake you made along the way that you learned from that you think others could learn from?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is having accountability, actually. I've learned a lot about that. Accountability for me is one of my big values, and that really stems from being a person of integrity. And so I've had, some situations. I'll share an example in the early days of my business, and this is like very client specific, but it's in my nature to want to be a perfectionist. I shared I was a recovering perfectionist. And as a competitive individual athlete growing up, you're competing against yourself. So for me, that's where accountability is so value driven in my world, because I want to just continue to be better each time and every day, which can sometimes get you a little mucked up. And so, because I'm not perfect at it, and there will be many mistakes in my future, where the key to resolving and navigating those mistakes, though, is being accountable. So a few years ago, early on in my business, I had a client who we took a ton of stuff out of her closet that she no longer needed. And some of those pieces were some really nice pieces in her closet that were just worn down and she was ready to part ways with. And it was a pair of Chanel booties, actually. And I said to her, okay, if I can't sell them, then I'm going to donate them to one of the partners that I work with, where we donate, gently worn items of clothing and accessories. And she said, okay, no problem. So I tried to sell them 3 times at 3 different partners of mine. They wouldn't sell. They were like, they're just too worn down, and that's part of like setting the expectations with clients and that kind of work, is like being able to communicate that upfront as much as possible. You learn that with time. So I ended up, without communicating to her, I donated the booties. And I said, okay, here's your summary report of what's been donated. And she was so upset that I donated the booties without telling her beforehand. And she was like, those were the first pair of nice shoes I ever bought myself as a business professional. Like, she clearly had an emotional connection to them. I understand how that goes. And I panicked. I was like, oh my God. I told her this was the process, but like, I didn't tell her in between these things that, this was where it was going. So like, what did I do? I messed up. She's never going to work with me again. She's a very, highly visible individual in the business community here and also nationally. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm over. I'm done. I'm not going to get any more clients. This is it. I totally messed this up. And I called my mentor and we spoke. She gave me some great advice. I ordered an orchid. I sent it to the client with a note apologizing and said, whenever you're ready, I'd love to take you out for a drink. Can we have a conversation? I'd like to talk about what happened. And
can I just say wow for a second? Wow. Okay, keep going. That sounds amazing.
And well, I got coached on that, which is good. I now know that. But we did it. We sat down. We had a glass of champagne. And she said, I have to tell you, the flowers, the orchid was beautiful. Thank you so much for the note. I was having an emotional day that day, so I overreacted. They're just shoes. And I said, well, they're going to go to someone else who will appreciate them. She says, I know that. She's like, I just wanted to be the one to make that choice, not you. And I said, well, lesson learned. Thank you for sharing that with me. And we sat and we talked, and she gave me some of the best business advice that I take with me today, which is I learned about accountability more that day, but also show up and cultivate relationships with people. Feed them, water them, do whatever you can, and be accountable in them. And that, I think, is like the biggest thing that I've learned as an entrepreneur, is just be accountable and show up with people and take care of people and keep your word.
Yeah, because in that situation, I think it would be very intimidating, overwhelming, scary, put in all the...
it was early too. I was still like, I'm figuring out what it means to be a stylist and an entrepreneur, and this happened, And of course, like in those moments, like our brain goes into like fight or flight mode, and it's just like, I'm over, I went to the deepest, darkest place, which was like, this is it. My career's over. I'm ruined. Right. And actually it was one of the greatest things that happened to me.
And you could have hid.
Oh, for sure.
You could have just said, all right, that's lost. Maybe the career isn't over, but that relationship's done and gone.
Yes.
That would have been, probably would have felt like the very safe mode to go. However, as we talked earlier, we're just going to say it, by going through the shit,
Yeah.
And getting to the other side of the shit, because the shit's going to be there.
That's right.
3 times.
Thank you.
You did. You went through it and you came out, so much better on the other side. And
so much better.
That relationship with her, I'm sure, probably went to levels that may not have gone without
Probably not, to be honest. And now, she's one of my longest, clients. She's someone I call when, I talk about I'm building my speaking business. Do you know anybody? Are there contacts that you may have? And she's like, I will always say yes for you. And I think really I credit that, to a lot of things, but a big part of that was like this pivotal moment, which was like, I put my big girl pants on and I had accountability. And, even as adults, we don't want to put our big pants on, for all of us, or big, we want to just sort of stay small and, be in the moment and try to quietly maybe resolve it. But those are the moments that you just have to be accountable. I'll share briefly, really quick, one other shoe story, which is funny that it's shoes. I had another client who I was sending her shoes to a cobbler that I work with, because I work with a service in New York who is a concierge, and they ship it back to you and they're like brand new and it's really lovely. And everybody likes to feel like their shoes that fit and conform to their feet came back like brand new again. That's like the greatest gift that gives. And so they got lost in the mail and I panicked. I was freaking out. And they were like, we don't have them tracked anywhere. We don't have them. And I had to pick up the phone and I had to call her and I had to tell her. And, I sat for a few minutes and I thought, okay, how are you going to walk into this situation with accountability right now? What does that look like? And for me, it was, you're going to own up to what happened. You're going to explain it with brevity, as quickly as possible. And then you're going to offer a solution, and then you're going to shut your mouth and you're going to listen. And I did just that, told her what happened. And I said, I'm going to buy you a brand new pair of shoes, because this is unacceptable. I lost them. I'm really sorry. And she came back on the phone and was like, I didn't really want to keep them anyway. Don't worry about it. It's all good. I sent her flowers anyway as an additional apology. We now have had an incredible relationship because of it, right? Rather than just, I'm not saying I would do this necessarily, but being like, oh, they got lost in the mail. I don't know what happened, right? Like, no, they were in my care and, they got lost under my supervision. So you just have to take ownership of those things. And I do think that though these are shoe situations, I do think and hope that these apply to many, many, many situations in people's lives. But be inspired by the shoes.
I think they do, because, I don't know. I can see through my kids what their schooling is like. But when I go back to my childhood, right, don't make mistakes, don't mess up, there's punishment, and it's in a bad way, right? There's consequences and there's punishments, and you might even think that you're a bad person. And if you get something wrong on your paper, it's, red. And at least when I was growing up, it was all about, working hard, doing the right things. And maybe I internalized this, don't make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it's hard to end up growing out of that. Mm-hmm. And getting to the other side where we're humans.
Right.
We're going to make mistakes. How can you learn and grow from it versus have it be a negative part of your character?
Well, that's the resilience of it, right? When people say, oh, you're so resilient, or that person's so resilient, like, we all are capable of resiliency. But in order to be resilient, you have to have the fumbles, the stumbles, the failures. And it's just a matter of then, like, what are you going to do to pull yourself out of it? And that really ties into the earlier point that I made, which is, I actually don't want to be, I'm not trying to intentionally make mistakes here, but I accept that they are going to happen, because I accept that I am a human being who has flaws and will have failures. I actually don't want to be too far from my last failure, because I want to continue to work my resiliency muscle. I want those reps to be put into action.
Yeah, and if you're not, I'm saying this for everybody as much as for myself, if you're not failing or you're staying inside the comfort zone, you're not trying something new, you're not learning, you're not growing, you're not expanding beyond who you are in your current state.
Right. And I will say to that point as well, it has helped, being in it has helped me also create different thinking patterns and have aha moments, if you will. And there's one in the recent year actually where I'm involved in various nonprofits, and I finally kind of got to a point where I was like, I've been invited to have a seat at the table. What am I waiting for now? Just speak up and come with an action plan and say something. Don't wait to be asked, or don't wait for the opportunity, for the permission to be granted. Grant yourself the permission, and with respect for reading the room and, knowing what your contribution can be, but just speak up. And that was probably one of the most groundbreaking moments I've had in my life recently, where I was like, why are you waiting for other people's permission? You can go and present something or come up with an idea or, pitch something and expect to know that there could still be a no on the other end of it. But that's how you get it done. And that's a risk. But this goes back to this voice that we have in our heads. All of us, myself included, I've shared some examples. It doesn't go away. It still can come up. But the more resilience I practice, the quieter that voice gets. And that's where I say, just come to the table and provide a solution. I provide solutions every single day for people. Again, whether it's through styling or I'm coming and doing a coaching session or a workshop, or I'm leading a keynote, I'm here to give people solutions. And if someone can walk away with one thing, that goes back to my whole North Star about wanting someone to feel really great about themselves at one point throughout their day. I apply that to everything now. If I can show up to the table and say, if one person in here can walk away with something good from this, and maybe that one person is me, then I did something right.
Wow, that speaks to a lot of what I've been doing over the last few years, the podcast, and we could go on more and more about that. People will be shocked. We might be shocked at how long we have been talking. I think for those who are out there and saying, okay, I could work with her one-on-one coaching, consulting, or she can come speak to a group, a conference, et cetera, about these things. Take a step back, when somebody says, hey, I want to work with Laura, what does that look like?
Sure.
How does that start?
Granular? Well, I usually get an email through my website or a text introduction from a friend. And if it's styling, we set up a 20-minute complimentary call and we're on video just so we can get to know one another, because just as it's important for you as the potential client to feel me out, I'm also feeling you out as well. And we just have an open dialogue. You tell me about your pain points when it comes to style. I ask some questions about your lifestyle, and then we chart a path. The first thing that I do with everybody is we go and do a closet edit. So we have to clear the noise. And then I get you onboarded onto the virtual platform. And then we decide, okay, maybe you want to do some shopping this season, or maybe you're going on a trip and I'm going to pack you for it, or you've got events coming up. And then I become a member of your team, like I said. So I have clients I've worked with for years. They just call me and say, oh, here's my schedule of events for spring, or here's my travel, or I want to get a few items in my closet. What can we do? And we work on those projects. Now, the speaking side of it, similarly, just send me an email, reach out. By the time that maybe this goes live, my new website will be live. So we're reworking it a bit. So it's very, very, very forward focused on solutions that I offer for speaking. So whether it's at conferences, or I'm coming in and I'm talking to your organization, whether in person or virtually as well, I do both. And we have a series of calls when it goes into speaking, of course. So I've got some topics that you'll see, eventually on the website that will hopefully be up by the time this goes live, but that we can also personalize for your group, knowing what your needs are. So with conferences, right, there's usually days where things are there's tracks, there's maybe a theme that people want to focus on. And, they're usually like an hour long. But again, like I said, I do workshops where I'll come in and do smaller leadership teams, or it's leadership succession planning. And we'll do like a 2-hour workshop with folks too, that again is very, it's a lot more data. We didn't even get to a lot of the data today, because this is, I've got to start on the surface with people, but it gets into the research in it, and then how people can apply that to their day to day. But in the planning process for, speaking, we have a few calls that go into making sure that the content is right for your group. We have a tech call, and then, we show up and have a great day together.
And so that's through, as you mentioned, and I'm sure by the time this goes out, your new website will be up. Websites, social media, they can find you.
I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter on Substack called Style and Substance. I'm everywhere. I'm very visible. And the nature of the spelling of my last name it helps, distinguish me from other people.
Right. So if you're looking out there for Laura Sawyier,
yes,
you've got to add an extra vowel
it's a
in
silent
the last
I.
name.
It's just Sawyer with a silent I. It's Sawyier. My maiden name was Smith, which is just like hilarious to me because I'm like, I went from Smith to silent I Sawyer.
Yes, the nuances of those things. But as you said, it will stand out for sure. And some of the things that are swirling around in my head, especially one I want to implement right away, was that talk of gratitude. And I have gotten to the point where I'm really trying to practice gratitude. I run every morning. And was trying to think, okay, maybe 3 things every morning as I start my run. And I run outside. So what are those 3 things? However,
have you ever said, I'm grateful I'm running this morning?
I probably haven't.
Okay. That seems like a good one, right?
Right. And
I mean, for someone who can't run at the moment.
True. And anyway, we won't go there.
Yeah.
What I loved that you said there, which I've never done, is thanking myself, being appreciative of myself for having that really hard conversation or making that really tough decision that I knew for a while was the right thing to do, yet had avoided because I knew it was going to be painful, and I did it anyway.
Right.
And I'm sort of used to brushing that under the rug. However, I think now I'm going to take a different approach to not only thanking and being grateful for things that are external to me, but really thinking about thanking myself for the things that I'm taking on or doing or acting.
Well, I'll leave you with this, and I'll leave you who's listening with this as well. My mentor last year, I wrote a newsletter about this, sent me a card in the mail that basically said, if I asked you to name all the things you love, how soon would you say yourself? And so I now wake up every day and I'm in bed and I'm like a little slow to get out of bed sometimes. But in that moment, it takes half a second. I will, even in my head, not even always out loud, I will wake up in the morning and say, I love you, Laura. And that's how I start my day. And that was a really big moment for me. And I think you just articulated that in another way, which is like, we need to tell ourselves these things.
Can't say it any better than that. And I can't think of a better way to end because I will now start doing that every day. Thank you so much for the whole journey, the story, the permission to value ourselves and who we are at our core and to live that no apologies while reading the room and being smart about the situation and taking risks and believing in ourselves that we belong there. We deserve to speak up. Why not? And appreciate just the journey and the content that so much of us can learn from. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you. I enjoyed this very much.
This concludes another episode of the She Lift Project podcast. To hear more episodes of the show, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about our mission of helping women reach higher levels of success, visit sheliftproject.com and sign up to receive the latest news, ebooks, videos, and more.